So we'll get started now. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be, and welcome to the much delayed and now virtual presentation of Natural Gas World's Canadian Gas Dialogues Pandemic Edition. My name is Dale Lunan, and I'm the Americas editor for Natural Gas World. I'll be hosting the upcoming series of webinars, which will present in nearly its entirety the agenda originally conceived for Canadian Gas Dialogues. Back in November and December of 2019, when we began putting together the program for this event, we, along with pretty much the rest of the world, had no idea at all what 2020 had in store. As news of the coronavirus began emerging in January and February, many of us thought it would be a minor epidemic, flu symptoms, and most of the impacts would be felt primarily at the supply chain levels. People stayed home sick, et cetera, et cetera. By early March, however, the World Health Organization was talking of a global health emergency, and that evolved quickly to become a global pandemic declared by the WHO on March 11th. As if that weren't enough, at about the same time, OPEC Plus members Saudi Arabia and Russia opened a crude oil price war. The twin hammer blows of the pandemic and that price war staggered the global oil and gas industry. Commodity prices collapsed and demand destruction in the crude oil and refined product sectors was widespread. To a lesser extent, the natural gas industry was also impacted, evidenced in part by the dramatic reduction in global LNG trade over the last couple of months. The measures taken to flatten the curve of the COVID-19 pandemic forced us here at Natural Gas World to cancel our original Gas Dialogues event on April 1st. No April Fool's joke here, and consider other ways to deliver this critical content. At the same time, we began to pivot to explore what the Canadian gas industry and indeed oil and gas markets around the world might look like as we emerged from economic lockdowns. And that is the focus of our opening keynote session today. Joining me are Timothy Egan, President of the Canadian Gas Association, and Mac Van Wielingen, who I'm sure most of you know well, founder and partner of ARC Financial and chair of Viewpoint Investment Partners here in Calgary. For much of the last year or so, Mac has been exploring the evolution of Canada's energy sector, identifying several emerging themes that are likely to shape the future of oil and gas in Canada. For the next 45 minutes or so, he and Tim will discuss some of those emerging themes and other forces pushing on the Canadian energy sector. It promises to be a lively discussion, and we encourage you to pose questions to Tim and Mac through GoToWebinar's Q&A function. I'll be back later for that, but for now, I'll turn the screen over to Timothy and Mac. Gentlemen.
Thank you, Dale. Tim, I'm off first here. Am I? No, I can't hear Tim.
Yeah, you can now. I had just muted myself, Mac.
Oh, okay.
But you won't get background noise of my family here.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you very much, Dale, for the introduction. And Tim, it's a real pleasure to be sharing the podium, so to speak, with you. As Dale says, I've been very engaged over the last few years in conversations about the vision of energy and energy policy in Canada. And I confess that I used to go into a lot of these discussions with a comprehensive description of what I thought would be the ideal go-forward basis of energy policy in Canada. And I was talking to so many different people who had such different perspectives and different interests. There were consumer groups and businesses, different products were involved, different parts of the country, government policymakers, political people, investors, and the stakes feel so high for so many people. There was lots of different ways of looking at the issues, and as we're all well aware, lots of polarization, disagreement, and conflict. And so, what I did to deal with that was to disaggregate, in a sense, the perspectives and the what I call themes of vision. And I'm going to go through a really quick summary here of those themes, and just taking a look to see what time it is, because I'm going to go very fast through it, and then Tim and I can speak to some of these themes in more depth, and we can respond to your questions. And I should say as well, there's a document that will be distributed to you, I hope, towards the end of this week. And all of what I'm going to say today is in that document. And the first point, the first theme is on the theme of ESG, and it's and it's one of the most important points I can make, and that is that I firmly believe that we need to embrace an expanded concept of ESG, environment, social governance, where economics is always included. And I refer to this as EESG. Some people will say double ESG, but the point is that we don't talk about economics without talking about ESG, and we don't talk about ESG without talking about economics. And economics in the broadest sense, including investment-related economics. And it's a very powerful framework to understand our interests and to understand all of society's essential interests and aspirations. When you look at economics, of course, what comes to mind is economic prosperity. When you're looking at the environment, what comes to mind is what I sometimes think of as our nature-based prosperity. And the S in ESG, the social side, is health, education, and safety, and at the deepest and broadest level, the quality of human experience in our society. And the G is something that I feel that we're not focusing on enough. A lot of people think of governance as just relating to corporate governance, but of course, governance relates very much to the way we govern ourselves through our government. And integrity, ethics, and effectiveness are critical for supporting prosperity across our society. So ESG is not going away, and so I think we need to go into it and address our issues and speak to the world from the context of this framework, but broadened to include economics. That's theme one. Theme two is that we need to embrace a customer-first adaptive mindset towards the emissions challenge. And I feel that we are. And our customers want low carbon products, and we need to wholeheartedly embrace what our customers and our stakeholders and the public want. And just on this point on emissions, there's no question, and I know that many of you would be aware of this, but Canada's been making significant progress with respect to reducing emissions in many different ways. And specifically, the oil sands emissions are going down and trending towards the average of crude oil refined in the US. And certain new oil sands projects like Suncor's Fort Hills and Cenovus's Christina Lake are below the US average. And our leading companies are committed to ambitious reductions. Our electricity sector is the greenest in the world, among the greenest in the world. 82% of our power is coming from non-greenhouse gas emitting sources, and that's approximately twice the 40% average for OECD countries. We're a global leader in methane regulations. Our natural gas, I believe, is probably the greenest in the world. We're a global leader in carbon capture and storage. And so those are a few points there. In the document, you'll see that I identify a few serious policy questions. And one specific policy questions that I'm always asking, and I never really get good responses from government and policy makers, and that is if we can demonstrate that our energy products will do no harm on the basis of emissions compared to comparable products in the markets that we're serving, how would we justify ceding market share to other suppliers who have less stringent emission and environmental standards? It's a very important strategic question. And what it points to is, in a sense, a guideline, a strategic guideline, and that is our energy products will do no harm in the markets they serve. A third theme is simply, and I'm going to touch on this very quickly. There's more, and again, all of you would know this. There's more to Canada's ESG story than emissions. It's the combination of many ESG factors that creates an advantage position for Canada's oil and natural gas sector. It's our pipeline systems, it's our marine transportation systems, it's the fact that our oil and gas sector is the largest clean tech investor in Canada. We're the largest employer of Indigenous people. Corporate governance is, I believe, is among, if not the best in the world. So we have issues and we have problems, of course, but our ESG is among the best in the world, and we're committed for it to get better. The next theme is critical, I believe, and is not discussed enough from a strategic point of view, and that is the energy transition that so many people are focused on, the decarbonization, the commitment to deeply decarbonize our economy, is best described as an energy evolution. It is multi-decadal, arguably even multi-generational, and the debate about peak oil demand gets much more attention, I feel, than perhaps it deserves. I mean, the fact is that oil demand in developed countries and advanced countries, and certainly in Europe over the last 10 years or so, has been plateauing and declining in many countries. And the growth, of course, was in the non-developing part of the world. Plateauing demand, which is really what I see over the next 10 years or so, is not a marker for the death of the Canadian oil and gas industry, but it is a marker, or it's a proclamation that we need to become more strategic to find our role and path in this market. And the one way I describe the possibility of this path is using the expression of the concept of best barrel. Best barrel as an aspirational path. And some of you would have heard this before, I know, but in a long-term transition to decarbonization, the last barrel to be phased out should be the best barrel, and the best barrel should be Canada's barrel. I believe, now I say barrel, I should be saying energy products. It's simpler just to say barrel. And but I believe that represents an inspiring challenge to the Canadian oil and gas industry, and it's a theme that we can all rally around. And it's figurative; it is not literal, because I have had some people say, "Well, firstly, there will be no last barrel," and I agree with that. And then they're saying, "Well, we can't be the best barrel because of this or that." And I think the point is that it changes the dialogue. And then we need to ask ourselves, well, what do the best energy products look like? And how can we serve markets from that perspective? The next theme is, and again, I fully expect that all of you have heard these themes in different ways, and it's the concept of global leadership in clean, reliable, responsible energy development. And that, again, our energy products will do no harm. And in this connection, when you look at Canada's industry globally, we just recently updated a lot of these indexes, which compare Canada to our competitors. So this would be the top oil producers, top 10 oil producers in the world. And we're number one pretty much, well, we are not pretty much, we are number one on all these criteria. We're first in the Sustainable Development Index, first in the Environmental Performance Index, first in Global Peace Index, first in World Happiness Index, first in Social Progress, first in Human Freedom Index, first in Human Development Index, first in Democracy Index, first in Corruption Perception Index, first in Rule of Law, first in World Press Freedom, first in Resource governance. And the point I'm making is that Canada's energy sector and Canada, in contemplating its strategy with respect to its energy sector, has an extraordinary brand platform in the world. And it's something that we really need to step onto and to take advantage of. The next theme relates to what I just said, but it's a little different. And I will say that when I first started talking this way, the eyes would roll, and some people would get kind of uncomfortable because it reminds them of the language that somebody else uses, a very high-profile political person in the United States. But the language here and the description is global first, Canada first. And our first priority, so it's not just Canada first. Our first priority should be to reduce global emissions and serve Canada's own national interests. So from the perspective of climate risk and the concern, the intense concern, if not preoccupation around that, that can be a vision that we can articulate, is that we can do both. And in fact, we will do better in reducing global emissions if we're also serving our own interests and we're collaborating among ourselves. A key point in this perspective, global first, Canada first, is to appreciate, and also people get uncomfortable with this as well. It's just a, in my mind, it's a factual reality, and that there are very few countries around the world who signed the Paris Accord, who have credible plans and policies in place to comply with their targets. And so it creates incredible risk for Canada when you think about global emissions and you think about the possibility that we're going to spend hundreds of billions of dollars transforming our economy, and our share of global emissions, which I'll speak to it again in just a moment, is immaterial. And so at the end of the day, when we go out 10 years, we're going to find that there were other major producers and countries that did not comply, and Canada did what they think is the right thing, but we didn't make a difference. And that's the point. If we're focused on just the Paris Accord targets, we may not make a difference in terms of reducing global emissions. The eighth point is the new economic realities that we're in now. And Dale referenced this in the context of, well, post-COVID, what do we really look like, and what does the energy sector look like? But we need to ask ourselves also, what does the country look like economically and fiscally, and people are all asking that question, and there are many perspectives. Well, things aren't going to be the same. Things will be the same. Everybody's debating it, but there's one thing with certainty we can say that will not be the same, and that is the amount of debt that we've taken on. The $380 billion deficit that we're running this year will be on our books. It will be a liability for all Canadians long term, and it's important to appreciate is that there's no offsetting productive asset. We basically filled the hole of lost income, and it's not like in an organization, in a business or a household, you make an investment, there's an offsetting asset. Maybe the investment isn't in good shape, maybe there's some possible losses. Well, the virtual entirety of this is there's really no offsetting productive asset to enhance the productivity of Canada going forward, and it's a critical perspective. The other point is just the size of the debt. When you aggregate debt in Canada from household debt, which is among the highest in the world, consumer debt, and corporate debt, which is among the highest in the world, and provincial debt and federal debt, when you aggregate it all, that you get to a number of about $7 trillion against the $2 trillion economy, 350%. And the federal government and key ministers, and I just heard it just 2 days ago again, they like to say that going into this, we had a very strong we're in a very strong fiscal position, and our balance sheet was very strong. And they always quote this number, 35% of GDP, and I find it very disheartening, and it just doesn't represent the indebtedness of Canada. Not only because, of course, the national government has taken on a lot more debt, but so have the provinces and all decision-making entities across our society have. And we have to bear in mind that all this debt is against only one economy. So the point is, with respect to this piece, this theme, is that we have both stagnant productivity and excessive indebtedness. Logically, that should force a reset in our priorities towards productivity and growth. And we can talk about that if you wish. The next point, the next theme that people will talk about, and I'm starting to talk about more and more, is that our strategy, our energy strategy and policy is failing our national interests. And I mentioned some of these themes are, in a sense, complementary, or they overlap. But I live in the world of strategy, and I have for decades, albeit corporate strategy. But we study strategy. We're always asking the question, what does good strategy look like? What does great strategy look like? And when you look at what we're doing in Canada, one of the criteria of great strategy is materiality. Is focusing on what is most important. If you look at annual global emissions in the world on a clock, it would take 36 hours to account for the emissions of Canada's total upstream sector, and 6 days to account for all of Canada's emissions as a country, leaving 359 days to other emitters. You can look at the data, you can slice and dice it in all sorts of ways, but our emissions, and again, this is something that a lot of people are uncomfortable about. And I've actually had people tell me, stop talking about this. And it's because they think I'm implying that we shouldn't do anything, that we should just go into kind of a non-active, passive perspective with respect to emissions. And that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, as we make trade-offs and we contemplate our own interests in this, let's just be very aware our emissions are immaterial to the problem we're trying to solve, and that is global emissions. And if we're not careful, we will tank our own essential interests to achieve something, again, that's not going to make a difference to the global problem. And my last theme is what I think of as more a unifying vision, and it really is a summary of everything that I've just presented here into a set of principles. And when you see the final document, that'll probably be at the front of the document. And it's a set of principles and understandings that could form the basis of intelligence, strategy, and policy for Canada. And I debated whether I want to say this, particularly to end on this, that when you look at this summary of principles and see I believe the evidence and see the logic of it all, one of the key pieces is a vision and a set of strategies that are unifying and collaborating nationally, regionally, provincially, within our own country to make this happen, to optimize our advantages, to work together to optimize our advantages, to seek out synergies in our strategies. And synergies requires working together. It requires collaboration. Energy sector cuts across everything that we do. And a government plays a hugely important role. And Canada, within Canada, we have failed to really work together in energy development and energy policy. And we have not been serving Canada's interests and global interests. Now, the part I didn't want to say, but I'm going to, because we can have some conversation about it, is answer to the question, well, am I optimistic that Canada could do this? And so in a sense, what I'm offering is this set of principles. This ultimately you'll see, yeah, I present it in disaggregation in a disaggregated form, but it's really the basis of a larger vision for Canada's energy industry. But am I optimistic that we can pull that off? And I have to say I'm not. And I just have to be real with everybody. And it's because there's a lot of uncertainty as to whether we can. And it's because of intensely politicized, regionalized polarization in our country. And it's a sad reality. I do have signs that it's changing. And there's more realism and pragmatism coming in. But it's that's the piece that worries me the most. So Tim, over to you.
Well, thanks, Mac, and thanks, Dale, and your colleagues in Natural Gas World for the chance to join you this morning. I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm a bit intimidated being on a panel with Mac, given his experience versus mine. And Mac, I really appreciated that overview of your themes. I think that's a very useful way of looking at the overall picture we're facing in the energy sector. I'm just going to take a couple minutes and drill down a little bit on some of the stuff you talked about from a downstream natural gas industry perspective, because I think it's relevant to all of those themes, and dare I say it might actually offer a somewhat more optimistic look, because it comes down to the individual Canadian and where they have grounds for optimism and how they have consistently managed to pull us through things, and they will do so again. So let me just give you a snapshot on the gas industry and where we are in COVID. So the downstream industry was ready for COVID in many respects, and it's because it's an industry focused on ensuring continuous delivery of reliable energy services under any circumstances. We have pandemic protocols in place and all the related procedures to enable us to transition quickly to a lockdown state. Now, before COVID, the dominant issue, it's only 6 months ago, it seems like years ago, but the dominant issue was actually protests at resource project sites, including pipeline sites. And this had our industry wondering about the safety of its workers, not because of the inherent dangers in handling gaseous fuels, but because of the possible threat of confrontation at work sites with those opposed to the work we do. Now, in spite of that, when COVID hit, our frontline crews were there right across the country, determined to make sure that energy was being delivered. And I think this speaks to the real culture of our industry, one of constant attention to the customer and the customer's needs. Now, there are almost 15,000 workers in the downstream gas industry, and they're very, very proud to responsibly deliver energy every single day to the over 7 million customers we have across the country. So those are residential, commercial, industrial customers. And we deliver Canada's most affordable and most reliable energy. When storms hit, gas systems rarely go down. When you hear about rough weather, you hear a lot about power outages, but you very rarely hear about gas outages. And we're trying to make it all the more rare with a constant emphasis on service improvement. So for those reasons, it's no wonder that we're actually the fastest growing energy delivery system in Canada. Our customer base is growing at over twice the rate of population growth, and our percentage of energy end use, which is now roughly 35%, is expected, and this is Canadian Energy Regulator statistics I'm relying on here. It's expected to grow to around 40% within the next 20 years. That'll make it the largest single end use of energy, but of more interest, I think, it'll be roughly twice the end use that electricity has. So despite claims by politicians that we're electrifying energy use, customers, the constituents of those same politicians, are saying otherwise by their choices. So we have backbench government MPs, so these are members of Justin Trudeau's Liberal Party, calling us to talk about how the gas system can be extended to more of their constituents, all while ministers of the Crown of the same government talk about getting off of hydrocarbons. And I think this speaks to a fundamental disconnect that's widespread amongst elites in our country, be they political or corporate or media or academic. Because at the end of the day, hardworking Canadians care enormously about their ability to afford their day-to-day lives. And fundamental to affording the day-to-day expenses of life is affordable energy. It underwrites everything else that we do. Now, of course, Canadians do care about other things. But when they come at the expense of a family's ability to pay its bills, those things are secondary. Too many people in positions of authority go on about a range of policies and programs that will be put in place to design a Canada that they consider ideal. But the best Canada is one formed by the day-to-day actions of millions of Canadians living their lives. And affordable natural gas helps them do that. As we all attempt to move beyond the lockdowns, there's much talk about a green recovery or a fundamental reset or a step change in how we do what we do. You can tell I'm fighting a cold, which is why I'm not actually in Calgary. They wouldn't let me on the plane. I don't have COVID, but I'm fighting a cold. Anyway, sure enough, in the gas industry, we're always looking at ways to improve how we do what we do. So we're looking at new fuels like hydrogen and RNG, or at new innovative technologies that drive efficiency and reduce our environmental footprint, or at process and equipment changes that improve reliability and our safety performance, but always with a focus on the customer first. Now, we don't know what to expect in the next 6 to 12 months, but we think a lot of Canadians are going to be really hurting financially. And it picks up on Mac's last point. And what's key to a quick recovery is ensuring the fundamentals like affordable energy and the fundamental success stories like piped energy delivery can continue. So that's what I'm going to offer by way of introduction, Mac. And I'm going to turn over to Dale now for some initial questions. But Mac, I've got several for you, and I'm hoping we'll get a bunch from the audience.
Okay.
Dale?
Okay.
Thanks, Mac. Thanks, Tim. We've had a few questions come in. I'm hoping there will be more. So everybody watching, please get your thinking caps on and get those questions posted. Mac, many of the points you made about Canada's leadership position in a lot of those ESG metrics is quite well known within the industry, but pretty much ignored outside the industry. How can that be changed? Does it have to come from the industry, which the NGOs seem to ignore anyway, and a lot of the public doesn't believe anything the industry says these days? Or does that story need to be told by the government or by somebody else?
It's a really good question. You can hear me okay, Dale? Yeah.
Yep.
It's a really good question, and one of the conclusions I've come to, Dale, is that we need multiple voices and multiple channels communicating these realities. And it's one of the reasons why I want to do these kinds of sessions with people, where I can touch into large groups, and then all of us can start to carry the message, these kind of messages. And so that's one part of the answer. But the other part of the answer is ultimately we need our elected representatives, and we need our at the highest level, we need our political leaders to face outward with their backs to the industry and to speak to Canadians and to speak to investors and to speak to the global community about all our advantages and our strengths, unqualified. And they have not done that. At the national level, they certainly have not done that. And what I just said now, I have said at the end of every meeting I think I've had, or if you look at the materials that I've published over the last 2 years, and if you look at my submissions in the Senate hearings and to the House of Commons, the same point over and over. And in the Prime Minister's office, when I've been there a few times, I make that same point, is that, and I'm very sensitive to it, because about 75 or 80% of ARC Financial's investors are international. And so we know how they think about Canada. And so they see the divisiveness and the fighting. And the last election in September of last year was extremely negative in terms of the image of Canada, the way we're all attacking each other. And I know I'm going on here very long, Dale, but it's that regionalization piece. And we've had many investors say to us, like, why should we invest in Canadian companies when you have that kind of political risk where there's adverse and hostile policy always around the corner? And it's focused on the West. And of course, there's no electoral support for our existing government in the West, and that's having a huge influence. Now, that's a perception. That's just not my view, although it is my view. But no, that's a perception that exists certainly in the among sophisticated global investors. And I don't think we can dissipate it until our national leaders speak to the risk directly.
It almost sounds like it could ultimately require, and I hate to say it, a constitutional change, or a change in how our, especially the federal government politicians are elected. I mean, as you said in the document, all of Canada's energy production comes virtually from the provinces west of Winnipeg, and there's virtually no federal representation of any of those people.
No.
Which
right.
Leads to all of the Wexit talk and everything else. How do you fight that? I can't see a path apart from a change in the electoral process, and we all know how the current Prime Minister has responded to that sort of talk.
Yeah. I mean, that is the really big question for Canada's energy sector is how do you fight that? And I'll tell you for myself personally, as a Canadian, I have found it to be very disillusioning and very worrisome, because we're not the model we want to be in the world, and it's because of this issue, and it's because of the extreme temptation of advantage seeking within polarization. I mean, the reason why polarization persists is that some groups benefit from polarization, and they are prepared to amplify it and to seek advantage.
So let me weigh in here if I can, Mac. Dale, I don't believe it requires a constitutional amendment. I don't believe it's necessarily as regional as it can seem. In my remarks, I was trying to capture the point that at the end of the day, the customer is key in all of this. Now, in the natural gas industry, well over half our customers are in Eastern markets. Okay, these are not producing markets, these are consuming markets. And these are consumers who benefit from extraordinary affordability and reliability. Now, these are not messages that we have conveyed very effectively to our customers, nor have we conveyed how those things, and affordability and reliability, have been determined on the back of the kind of performance that Mac is talking about on the upstream. And increasingly, I think what we feel compelled to do as an industry is show that much more clearly how extraordinary our environmental performance is, our social performance is, our governance is. And with all due respect, I'm not convinced the average customer pays any attention to that. What the average customer pays attention to is, does the light switch work? Does the thermostat work? Does the ignition work on my car? And can I afford the fuels that are making those things work? And we as an industry have to get better at making the point that the reason those things work reliably and the reason they're affordable is because of what we do. And instead, because we're so caught up in a conversation about our performance on these sort of higher level issues, we tend to look apologetic, we look defensive, and we get into intellectual and esoteric conversations that frankly the average customer doesn't care about. And I think, if we actually were in a way, dare I say it, even a little more polarized in how we defend our interests, I think we might see some broader public support for what we do as an industry.
Tim, I think that's a great perspective. And in a sense, you're saying, let's focus on our performance to our customers fundamentally in terms of the way we present ourselves. And I think and you're close to it, like you're close to the downstream, and you're close to your customers, and a lot of people on this call would be as well. And I'm in Western Canada. I'm in the producing area. We're producing commodities into, in a sense, an anonymous market. We don't know our end use customers, and I think that's one of our greatest weaknesses, and that's one of the reasons we got ourselves into so much trouble. Is that we're not really connecting with our customers, and so we were not customer focused. It was just selling at the lowest cost, at the best price into these anonymous markets. So I really appreciate the point you're making. And you got to make a few more points to make me feel a little more optimistic, but that's a good one.
I'll let Dale ask another question first.
Okay, we've got a question that deals with, we have a question that I should just turn you two guys loose and I'll go have a coffee. It deals more with some global issues. Over the last few months, a lot of the European majors, BP, one which is notable, has announced that it sees the end of oil in as little as 10 years. And BP, along with a lot of the other majors, Shell, Equinor, I think, has done this, have communicated a shift in their strategy towards energy services and which bring a lot more focus on renewables and the greening of their business. This is obviously a response to some public sentiment in the European Union and the large investor houses in Europe that are curtailing investments in fossil fuels generally around the world. Is how or I guess is this or how is this impact being felt in Canada?
Well, again, a great question, and it is being felt. And I think the way it's being felt is to shake our confidence in the future of our industry when you have major players like that saying, hey, listen, the writing's on the wall. The oil and gas industry is going into some form of long-term decline, and we're shifting now. And it shakes everybody's confidence about the future of the industry. But there's a few critical points to make, and I've made some of them already, and that is that for me the question is what is Canada's strategy into the market that we're serving and where we're competing? To look at these aggregate trends and say, well, we think that demand is peaking. We've come off 100 million a day. Canada's production order of magnitude is 5 million. We need to take the view that whatever market is there, we're going to be present, selling our products. We're going to reduce our costs. We're going to reduce our carbon. We're going to continue to advance on all key considerations that our consumers are interested in, our customers are interested in, and there's going to be a long-term role for Canada's oil and gas industry. And I don't take it as a kind of as a shock and it's the ultimate now that we all need to just wave the white flag. If anything, we need to work harder to compete harder as we move forward as an industry.
Yeah,
the other
Dale,
point I'd make. Yep. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Mac.
Well, I was just going to say that the other point that you're going to hear more people talk about is the shift of supply. I'm thinking oil now to less stable, quite frankly, less ethical less socially responsible countries in the world. That you know, when BP and other majors are in a sense just going into produce out, who's going to take up that production? And it looks like capital has declined so hard. It's very possible that production declines are going to be greater than demand side declines, and that sets you up for a lot of volatility as you go forward. But the democratic countries in the free market in North America, I mean, if we're all not careful, we're going to lose reliability of supply as we move forward.
Well, if I could, I reinforce that last point about losing reliable supply. I mean, you know, there have been several instances over the last year of markets where there have been profound disruptions of energy delivery because policymakers have decided to go down a particular road. Like, you know, the most recent being California and blackouts across California, where you know, the rhetoric of green power has taken such hold that there are all kinds of policies in place that are undermining the very stability of, you know, what should be one of the most sophisticated societies in the Western world. Now, when you talk about, you know, BP announcements, or I think I saw a clip, was it this morning or yesterday, from Shell, that they're undergoing a significant cut in expenses, and it's presented as a means to help them reposition towards renewables and energy services. At the end of the day, super majors are going to make announcements that hopefully trigger a positive response from investment markets. And investment markets are very seized with green rhetoric right now. They are. It's you know, it's the flavor of the day. But to Mac's point, 100 million barrels a day, right? That's an enormous quantity of fossil fuels. And say we have reached a peak and it starts to decline. I'm not convinced of that, by the way, given the fact that there are an estimated 2 billion people in the world who live in energy poverty and want access to energy services, the kind that we've benefited from for a long time. But even if there is a modest decline, why shouldn't Canada try to get a solid share of that, given how we do what we do, how effective we are, how transparent and efficient and responsible we are as in the sector? So, you know, a few months ago, Elizabeth May and the Bloc leader talked about the death of the oil and gas industry. And I wrote a letter saying we're not dead yet. In fact, we're here to rebuild Canada post-COVID. This is the approach I think we should take as an industry, where we spend more, as Mac noted, on clean tech than any other sector. We are better positioned than anybody to deliver more to the world, not less.
Exactly.
Yes.
Here's a couple of related questions, I guess. Tim, you spoke of policies and how those drive investments. What specific policies can Canadian governments promote to create, you know, win-win scenarios that balance environmental and economic concerns and still help Canada meet its international commitments while promoting growth at the same time? And a corollary to that is how does natural gas fit into that green shift? I mean, is hydrogen truly an option in Canada? Is it gray hydrogen? Is it blue hydrogen? Is it green hydrogen? How should industry and governments be leveraging our existing infrastructure to promote that shift, if indeed that's the direction we want to take?
Well, look, this is I think the only self-induced economic decline in human history, right? And we had to do it. It was a shutdown because of COVID, but it's actually a recession we've created, right? And so what that says is that the fundamentals of our economy should still be very solid if we can sort of turn the switches again. So what do you do to trigger those fundamentals to act, to move fast? And I think one of the things you do is you look for where your strategic strengths are. And what are your strategic strengths in Canada? Well, one is a phenomenal energy delivery system. And I talk about natural gas, but I'd say the electric system as well. I'd say the liquid fuel system. What are we doing to make sure that delivery system can get energy to customers faster, more affordably, more reliably, in short order, so that manufacturing can ramp up again, so that businesses can ramp up again? That means government should be looking at, okay, are there regulatory provisions we have that we could pull back right now in order to trigger more economic growth? Are there initiatives that we could take that would send signals that would trigger faster economic responses? Are there provisions we can make in the tax code that would trigger a quick response on things like that? I think there are a series of those. We put a letter into the federal government about this. I think government has to avoid the urge, and I know it's a strong one in many governments, to say, all right, this is a chance to pick a favorite and say, all right, that's what we're going to go with. Okay, that this is the technology or this is the fuel we're going to go with. I don't think they should do that. I think they should, in fact, try to pull back the levers of government and allow the market to rush in and do the kind of productive things it can do. Last point, Dale, you mentioned hydrogen. Well, we're very active in the hydrogen file. Many of my utilities are pursuing hydrogen projects. It goes hand in glove with the natural gas industry in all sorts of ways, because natural gas is a fundamental input for hydrogen. So we see an enormous opportunity long-term with it. We're doing pilot projects across the country. We're looking forward to what the federal government comes forward with on its hydrogen strategy. But always, as with any option out there, we're going to say, what is this going to do to the customer's ability to continue to get affordable, reliable energy? Can hydrogen be part of the mix? Yes, I think it can. But hydrogen's got a long way to go before it can meet the standard that natural gas meets right now in Canada.
Mm-hmm. Mac, anything to add to that?
Yeah. I mean, as a general point, when governments, provincial and federal government, look to pursue new policies to move us along and to restart our economy, what I'm saying to them is, and it gets right to the question, is whatever you do and however you direct our resources, make sure that you're at the same time you're satisfying a productivity criteria. And I mean, productivity is conceptually is just output relative to what you're putting in, and you can think of it as efficiency and productivity. And so, and if you look at productivity, the GDP per dollar or per hour worked in our economy, it's been stagnant, and it's the key driver of the standard of living in any country all over the world. And so if you continue to direct resources into assets that are not going to, in a sense, create value for all Canadians, economic value for all Canadians, our productivity is going to continue to stagnate, and we can feel good because we've done some great things socially and redistribution and so forth, but the average person and the average family will not be getting ahead. And so that I have not mastered the language of being able to communicate with the public on these kinds of matters. I just know from my background what it is that has to be done, and that has to be a significant consideration in however we're allocating resources moving forward, particularly given also how indebted we are. And so I really like what Tim said, that and that was my first instinct as well, to say this, that basically the same thing is just move back, move away, withdraw regulations that are difficult for us, and message that you're doing it. Don't be afraid to say, we're pro-business, we're pro-investment. I've dealt quite a bit with governments. I'm going to tell this little story because it's kind of just interesting and fun. And I'll just say it was with the Alberta government and the prior government, prior to the Kenney government, and I was the chair of AIMCO, and they kept asking me, how can we create jobs? We're a job and they were standing up and they were saying over and over and over, we are all about jobs, jobs, jobs. So they would sit with me and they'd say, how can we create jobs, jobs, jobs? And I said to them, well, when I hear you say jobs, 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 what I'm hearing is investment, investment, investment. There has to be a high level of investment in the economy to be able to create a high level of jobs. And when I hear and when I think of investment, 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 what I'm hearing is profit, profit, profit. In other words, you've got to figure out ways where private capital and public capital can generate higher levels of surpluses, revenues, less costs, so that can be reinvested if there's the confidence to reinvest to pursue opportunities. And so I think you should go out into the world and say profit, profit, profit. Now, that was an NDP government. I didn't get very far on that, but I made the point that we have to understand the way capital is created and formed to be able to really understand at a deeper level how it is we can run our economy well.
All right, thanks, Mac. We're out of time. We've got about 45 seconds left. I'd like to thank Tim and Mac for taking time out of their schedule and fighting through cold symptoms this morning to join us. A lot of this discussion is actually going to continue into our next session, which comes up in about 15 minutes, that will look specifically at the ESG issue and possibly even meld the economic aspect of that into it. I know that at least one of the panelists has some thoughts on that. So again, thanks very much. We appreciate your time, and for all of you out there, thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you at our next session starting in about 15 minutes.
Thanks, Dale. Thanks, Mac.
Great.
See you.
Great, Dale. Yeah,
Thanks, guys.
See you. Bye-bye. Bye.